It's
Oh.
Daniel in the Deacon's Den.
Oh, there we go.
How about that?
Boy,
Yeah.
I like that.
Deacon Dan Breyer joining us on this Wednesday on this feast of the Transfiguration. Good morning.
Good morning, Deacon Dan. Boy, did you hear that roar? I like that.
Good morning. I love that roar, especially as a Tiger fan. That's a great way to start the day.
There you go.
Especially after losing yesterday. So, you ended the day on a down note. We get to start the day on a happy note with a roar. So thank you.
I don't want to say anything, but the Guardians won their second game in a row against the Mets, but okay.
Yeah. I win once in a while, but I'm not going to mention that there's still 7 games left.
You weren't going to mention it, though.
They were 8 games yesterday. I'm just saying.
And that's when the fight broke
here's
out.
my bold prediction. There'll be 8 games out tonight also.
Yeah, probably.
So, today is the Feast of the Transfiguration. It actually is among my favorite feasts of the year for a variety of different reasons. But it's such an interesting and odd placement in what sits here on August 6th, And so actually one of the questions I oftentimes get from our students at the university is why they plop this in the middle of the summer. It's sort of an interesting, of all times when the feast could happen, why is it August 6th? And there's actually some trivia around this feast that our listeners may or may not be aware of. So here's my first trivia question. There are 2 times in the year that we hear the story of the Transfiguration. One of them is today on August 6th. When is the other time that gospel is always read?
Is it during Holy Week?
Yeah, you're close. Actually, it is the second Sunday of Lent.
Second Sunday.
Oh, okay.
Second Sunday, yeah. So the first Sunday of Lent is always the reading about Jesus encountering the devil in the desert,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second Sunday of Lent is always the story of the Transfiguration.
Yeah.
So that's kind of now with that little hint in mind. Here's the thing: tradition in the church says that the Transfiguration took place about 40 days before Christ died on the cross on Good Friday.
Mm.
So, and of course, the number 40 has so many implications. Jesus in the desert 40 days and the Israelites in the desert for 40 years. That number 40 comes up over and over again in the Bible. So, but even if you trace in the Gospels the timing of what was going on in Jesus' life, it would make sense to say that the Transfiguration perhaps happened about 6 weeks before Holy Week. And so if you put it 40 days before Christ dies on the cross, in the early church, as I understand it, that's when the feast was actually observed, the Feast of the Transfiguration. And so they would say, okay, we'll take whatever Easter is going to be, we'll count back 40 days and we'll celebrate the Transfiguration. And the fact that we still read those readings on the second Sunday of Lent is kind of a throwback in a sense, because that second Sunday of Lent is roughly 40 days before Good Friday. Now, really we have to kind of, when you think about Lent, from Ash Wednesday until Easter is really technically 46 days. So it actually is pretty close to being 40 days before, So why then will we celebrate the Transfiguration in modern day on August 6th? Well, the big thing is that one of the other huge feast days in the church is September 14th, when we celebrate the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross. And the Exaltation of the Cross commemorates Jesus' victory over death, just as Easter does. So it's kind of interesting because, in a sense, like the commemoration of, or the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross is like Good Friday all over again, but it's recalled about 6 months later. So if you count back on the calendar, August 6th is exactly 40 days before September 14th.
Oh, wow, okay.
So isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So that's why we celebrate it today, because it is 40 days until we'll celebrate the Exaltation of the Cross.
Yeah, and some of these things, Deacon Dan, that seem kind of just pulled out of thin air. They're not pulled out of thin air at all when it comes to the church.
That's exactly right. I mean, there's a lot of history that goes on there. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because in the early church, if they were going to celebrate the Transfiguration 40 days before Easter, that's fine. But once we started celebrating and kind of having that 40-day period of Lent, you didn't really want that feast day to get in the way, if you will, of Lent. So it makes sense to move it somewhere else. So why not move it to 40 days before the exaltation of the cross? So it has the same impact in a sense, because they really what we're talking about are two parallel events. The second Sunday of Lent is about 40 days before Good Friday, and August 6th is about 40 days before the exaltation of the cross. And in both of those cases, the message is to give us hope. It's particularly important, I think, in this Jubilee year of hope, that's what this is all about. You look at what happened at the Transfiguration and say, this is a reason for hope. And I think sometimes we can think about the Transfiguration story without thinking about the context of what comes before and after it. So let's just examine that for a second, because the context of that gospel reading today is that Jesus is walking along with his disciples, and all of a sudden, almost out of nowhere, he says that, by the way, the Son of Man is going to be arrested and killed. Can you imagine? So these 12 guys are all standing there, stupefied, saying, "Are you serious?" And I've been with you for 3 years. I didn't sign up for that. Mm-hmm. They're scared. They're rattled. They need reassurance. And so Jesus, recognizing that they need help, he takes Peter, James, and John to the top of the mountain, and he shows himself in all of his glory. He gives them this clear message that death is not going to be the end. And who does he appear with? Elijah, representing the prophets, Moses, representing the law. But most importantly, Elijah and Moses are there. They already died. Everybody knows they died a long time ago. So the apostles have to be looking at it saying, wow, Elijah and Moses are, quote, still alive, right? They're still with us. They're present. And so even though they died physically on the earth, they're still with us. And that's what's going to happen to Jesus. He's going to die, but we're not going to lose him either. He's always going to be with us. So this is the first part of it, is to sort of give them that confidence, that reassurance. But then something else happens in this gospel, or in this whole story. While Jesus is gone, the other 9 apostles are down the mountain, and they're trying to cure a child who is demon-possessed. And they're trying, but they can't do it. And so Jesus is gone. He's up at the top of the mountain with Peter, James, and John, and they can't get the job done. So what happens? Jesus comes down the mountain, and as soon as he comes down the mountain, the first thing he does is he cures that boy. Wow. And then they ask him, well, why weren't we able to cure him while you were up there? And he says, you didn't have enough faith. You didn't have enough faith to do it yourselves. So taken as a whole, what the Transfiguration is doing is that event is bookended on either side by Jesus saying he's going to die and by Jesus curing this child. And so that's a huge message of hope. It shows that Jesus is going to overcome death itself, and that his disciples are going to need to strengthen their own faith to do great things. So I think that the Transfiguration, what makes this feast day so cool, is it's a great way for us to examine ourselves and ask, how much do I really trust in God? Mm-hmm. How much do I trust that everything is going to work for good in my life? That no matter what happens, God's there, and he's going to turn it into good. He's going to turn the lemons into lemonade. And do I have enough faith in God? Do I have more faith in God than those remaining 9 apostles who were unable to cure that boy? How might I use Scripture and use times of prayer to build my own trust and my faith in God? It's interesting if you look at the Bible as a whole, and we think about lines like hoping in God or trusting in God. That phrase, trust in the Lord, appears over 100 times in the Bible. Like in the book of Proverbs, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. So our prayer today on this Feast of the Transfiguration is that we will be transformed by meditating on that story, and Jesus is appearing in all of his glory in the gospel, and that transformation will build our trust in God and our faith as well, just as it did with his apostles.
I love that. And look, Peter kind of takes it on the chin in this story, but I think I'd be saying the same thing Peter was thinking. I get us each a tent. Let's just hang out for a while. Gee, mate, it's Elijah and Moses with Jesus, for goodness sake.
Such a great lesson for us. The church gives us such a great gift. Lord, increase our faith, really.